Hello, this is Ileana and new episode of Ebb of Time. Today's episode we'll be discussing how what we wear is actually political and how it impacts a lot of people's lives, our environment, and in general that it created an industry that has become destructive. And to discuss this, I have my friend Tena with me. She's an activist. She's a fashion activist, and I'm very happy to have a friend with me. I think this is the first time that I'm having someone that I know personally, other than my cousin, who is basically the co-host. So thank you very much for joining, Tena. I want to start directly by asking who you are and why are you a fashion activist?
Thank you very much, Elena. I am very honored to be your friend. It's really exciting to talk to you. As you said very well, I am somebody who identifies myself as a fashion activist, public speaker, and events organizer. I've been into fashion for probably some 7, 8 years. I honestly stopped counting a couple of years ago. And it is something that I've been doing in various degree for that time, and definitely something I've been extra passionate about for, well, ever since COVID, even more passionate about. I haven't always been into fashion. In fact, my journey to fashion has been a bit long and maybe unusual. I can say that it's always been interesting to me, but I never really thought much about it. However, what I have been thinking a lot about almost ever since I can remember is the idea of justice. Ever since even I was a kid, I was born in the middle of the war in the Balkans. I was born in Croatia, and unfortunately, war has impacted a lot of my family and a lot of my growing up. Even though I personally do not remember it, I was a baby, it has still impacted a lot of people around me. So even before I could conceptualize it, the idea of justice was something that was prominent. And then later on, when I learned what that is, I started being a part of different activist organizations, different NGOs, especially when I started studying. And long story short, I was a part of one organization just after I graduated here in Belgium when I already moved. And just by chance, we were working on some project with youth and empowerment, and I had a chance to talk to a young woman called Nazreen Sheikh. And I love telling this story because I really think that those 16 minutes that I had a chance to talk to her via Zoom was the most transformative 16 minutes of my life, because Nazreen is somebody who, as a child, has worked in a garment factory in Nepal. She herself has experienced the worst part of fashion industry. She has also escaped extreme poverty and later has escaped forced marriage. She has told me her story, even though by at that moment, or before that, I kind of knew there were issues in fashion industry. I mean, it really doesn't take much to see that, but I really didn't think that things like child slavery are such a prominent part of it. And after hearing her story and seeing somebody who has went through, as I said, the worst parts of the industry, you can't look at the industry the same. And her only fault was she was born in a wrong place, basically. So I realized how deeply unjust the fashion system is. And ever since, it took me many years, but more or less from that moment, I started reading about it, I started learning about it. And pretty quickly, I came across a movement called Fashion Revolution. It's the biggest fashion activism movement in the world. We exist here in Belgium as well. We exist across the world, and things just went on with meeting them. And I just wanted to say that Nazreen Sheikh is somebody who continues her mission. She's a very inspirative person, and I couldn't recommend more to your listeners that they Google her name, maybe watch some of her talks, because she's currently one of the biggest voices of ethical fashion in the world. And she is helping other women escape similar situations.
That's amazing. I actually didn't know about this story, or maybe I didn't know her name. And it's indeed very inspirational. So we talked about injustice. I assume you said that you have been more involved in this topic since a couple of years. So in this couple of years, because in the meantime, well, in Europe, but also around the world, we have now more and more this sort of sustainability and ethics regulations through private initiatives that is increasing. That's like so-called. In some cases, yeah, it is. But I wonder, how do you see between the since you started and now, how does it go in terms of sustainability? How does it go in terms of ethical aspects of fashion? Because when I personally think about what I see on the market, I feel like the quality is going worse and worse, and the quality going worse and worse probably means also the treatment towards workers is also not going somewhere good. So how do you see the change, or is there a change?
Yeah, certainly. There is a change, but it's not a very straightforward change. It is very hard to say if we look back, I don't know, 10, 15 years, is it better or worse? Because it's kind of both. And I know that's a frustrating answer, but that's the reality we live in. I would say certainly we can't be oblivious to very negative changes that we are seeing. You mentioned quality. I think you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, even some more fancy brands today operate under a fast fashion system, because fast fashion is not just a series of shops or a chain of shops. It is a system of production and consumption. So even some more luxury brands today produce more than ever on like annual basis, and their quality is dropping. So it really became the dominant system. We also have the appearance of ultra fast fashion. So if the quantities of clothing that the quote unquote traditional fast fashion shops, like your typical high street shops, are producing, and we're talking about a lot of clothes, if those were shocking, that's nothing compared to ultra fast fashion. And I'm, of course, talking to companies like Shein and Temu, and I'm sure there are many more. So we cannot ignore those things. That just means more fashion waste, even more murky ways of production, even more toxins in our rivers and air and soil. So yes, from that perspective, it is sometimes hard to stay optimistic, but there are many good news. On just very basic, I can even see that the types of conversations I had with people like 5, 6 years ago and now are very different. The average consumer, whatever that means, or I would say the average person I come across, is definitely much better informed about fashion. I realize that nowadays, in most cases, I don't have to explain to somebody what fast fashion is and why it basically sucks. People are aware of it. People have more questions or are more interested in practicality. What can I do? How can I switch or whatever? Or how can I recognize better quality? People are past a lot of consumers in the West are past that first awareness wave. They're now looking, in many cases, they're now looking for alternatives, and there are certainly many alternatives. So I think just the average consumer, and this is just not also my opinion, there are research backing this up, are more aware and are also more looking for sustainable products. Now, our wishes and our practice are not always the same thing, but we do have many research in many different countries, not just purely Western Europe, that shows that people are, at least in theory, more willing to pay for something that is sustainably made versus not. So I think there has been a shift, like a larger mindset shift. We also, as you mentioned, we have regulation. I think it took long time for our policymakers in the EU and beyond to realize that fashion is a very big industry and that it's a serious thing. And a part of me wonders, is it because it's a very female industry? But that's maybe a conversation for later or another time. But we have finally realized that it is a big industry and that Europe also is pretty dependent on it on one side, but also is a big consumer of it globally. So we are finally doing something about it. It is a very slow process. There are many things that we could be doing, but we cannot deny that there are important changes. There is a whole EU textile strategy. There are more initiatives and more opportunities for smaller brands. There is more sort of appreciation and understanding that we need to support what is locally, what is more slowly made, etc. So even on legislation side, which is probably the slowest side, we see big changes. And finally, we do also see changes in companies, because there's a reason. I always say there's a reason why greenwashing is such a big problem. It's because companies realize that sustainable means something cool right now. It is a point of marketing now, whatever term they use, but they've realized that if they use slightly better materials, they have the right to charge more. I'm not saying this is a good practice, but greenwashing wouldn't be such a big issue if there wasn't money in sustainability. So even brands are now at least somehow trying to make things a bit different. We do see more and more, better materials in their collections, etc. There's a long way to go. None of them, however, is ready to reduce the amount of clothing they're selling, and that is the core problem. So whatever else they do, I think it falls short. But there are many actually attempts towards making the industry a bit better. We also see greater transparency. A fashion revolution, the movement that I mentioned earlier, has been doing so-called transparency index pretty much every year. For the last 2 years, we have been doing a bit more focused transparency index that focuses more on the sustainability and climate policies of the companies. But overall, the movement has been tracking biggest brands today on how transparent they are in how they produce, where they produce. And we have seen an increase in an average transparency. Transparency in itself is not a goal, but it is a first step towards making any change. If we don't know where our fabrics or fibers come from, we can't do anything. So we see that there is an increase in transparency, and I think at least partially movements like fashion revolution and public pressure on companies are the reason for it. So yes, there are many changes. I think overall we are realizing that the way we've been consuming and producing clothes in the past 20 or so years cannot continue. We are on a breaking point. However, there's no one way we are continuing from that point. The industry is significantly changing, but it's changing in sort of multiple directions at the same time.
We will come back to many of the things you have said. But I feel like there's also this dilemma because indeed people are more aware, but then they are, and this is by experience, like with talking with people, talking with my friends from back in Turkey, let's say, especially giving Turkey as an example, because, well, I mean, all around the world, the economy is fucked up, but in Turkey particularly, there is like very high inflation, etc. So people like cannot afford many things. So people know that, let's say, Zara or this and that are not great. They have shitty quality. They have in these are big companies with fast fashion, but then they are like, but that's what I can afford, which is also a problem because access to maybe secondhand, for instance, is not great, or for more smaller brands is not great. Also because production prices are so high, and if you want to produce in an ethical way, you're charging like at least 5 times more than what these brands are selling, basically. So this is a huge problem, I think. And social media is contributing a lot to this because we have this, even like I see people being bullied by dressing up with the same outfit second time. I mean, with people, I mean influencers, obviously. No one bullies me for wearing something second time so far. But this is like a very toxic culture. And I see, I mean, I believe that there is a progress in a way, but also sometimes not really. But I want to come back to the point where you talked about the amount of clothes they produce, because the amount of clothes they produced has this huge impact before and after, and maybe during of their production, but their sale basically. Because here we are talking about millions of pieces of clothes who need a basic material. Probably mostly it's polyester, which is basically petrol. So I'm not sure if everyone is aware that this is basically like fossil fuels that we are wearing on top of us.
Literally.
That's so weird to me. But even if it's not polyester, it's, let's say it's cotton, then cotton has its whole problematic way of production. And I read like several reports on, because it needs a lot of water, and then where you produce it, and because it becomes very profitable to do it, probably, instead of producing, I don't know, like a random food that is more needed. So that already is problematic in one way. But then there is the production part, which I read this report that was published by the Fashion Revolution on the what fuels fashion. Maybe we can come to that also. During the production, there is another set of huge emissions that is being produced. And after, when it's not trendy anymore or etc., the landfill part. So maybe we can talk about this horizontal chain of environmental harm. Can you walk us through a little bit on how fashion impacts environment?
Everything that we wear has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just magically appear, even though when you look at the offer fast fashion now has, like if you go to any of their website, at any moment they have tens of thousands of styles available for you, like on a click. So it may seem like a small thing, especially if those things cost very, very little. Like, you wouldn't think twice about €5 t-shirt or whatever, €10 t-shirt. You can always, even if it doesn't fit, even if it becomes faded or stretched after a few weeks, you can always buy a new one. And it's easy to assume that that cost is the only cost that we are paying, but it is not. The price is often just hiding the true cost, which is also a name of a great documentary for anyone who wants to learn more about the environmental and social impact of fashion. But indeed, everything that goes into fashion requires a lot. To start with, as you mentioned, we have raw materials, and that can be many, many things. Polyester indeed is in majority of our clothes nowadays. It's hard to estimate how much. Some reports say 60%, some say more, but we can pretty confidently say it's in the majority of our clothes is polyester. By the way, it's not the only synthetic or similarly synthetic material. Also, whenever you see nylon, elastane, spandex, acrylic, those are all pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same raw material, just made differently, but it's all, as you mentioned, oil. And I don't think we need to explain too much why using a resource that cannot be renewed is highly problematic, and depending on that is highly problematic. But also just extracting that oil, I think we know, comes with many, many environmental risks. And this even isn't strictly a part of fashion industry. The oil isn't necessarily just taken for fashion, but this is how we get fashion. Yes, any other material, even, yes, you mentioned cotton, but anything, even hemp, that is considered some of the most sustainable material, it still needs land to grow. It still needs water. It still needs care. It also needs human care. We also forget that, just getting that there are farmers growing these things. There are people taking care of the plant. Now, it isn't in itself a bad thing, but when we scale up, we can see that even the most sustainable crop, like hemp, can be problematic if it's grown in such quantities that it takes over fields and fields, or that it even ends up cutting forests so we can have more room to grow this. So the material itself is not as problematic For example, polyester needs way less water to become a fabric than cotton does. It is not, worse or better, it is the quantity. Then this fiber has to be transported to first factory to make it into a fiber. That requires processing depending on what we're doing. It requires human labor, it requires chemicals, it requires water, and often electricity and just the transportation of it. We already see here, okay, the energy is going up, the labor is going up. We see a lot of input. Then it usually goes to another factory where it's going to be spun into a fabric, because you have to get from, for example, a cotton pulp into a cotton fabric. So that requires extra processing. Often what will happen, it will travel to another factory, sometimes not. It's it really depends on the supply chain. But this fabric now has to be finished. It has to be dyed sometimes, often. It has to be dyed. It has to be maybe processed that it gives you a different kind of feeling or material. Maybe we want patterns on it. Whatever, we need to get a piece of cloth that we have imagined. When it comes to dyes, a lot of them are highly toxic, and most of the dyes that we are using are synthetic. Now, I have recently learned that that itself is not, again, an issue, because even natural dyes are not, the holy grail, the perfect solution. The problem is, again, in the scale. It is how much dye we are using. We could even use, the most natural dyes, but the amount of clothes that we need, the amount of fabric we need, we would not be able to sustain that. But a lot of dyes that we are using are made, we don't even know the full ingredients. A lot of the ingredients are pretty toxic for our skin, for our respiratory systems. And now imagine, they're toxic even for us when we wear them. Now imagine what it's like for workers who have to handle them on a daily basis, often without proper safety equipment or often without proper ventilation. So we had already human labor, but now we're getting even more direct fashion impact on human health. A lot of dyes also use tons of water, and especially in countries where it's less regulated, a lot of dyes end up in water and they just get disposed in local ecosystems. So a lot of rivers pretty much are dead rivers nowadays because of the fashion industry. They are too polluted to even have life in them, to even have fish in them. A lot of times communities have depended on those rivers for their economy, but also sometimes as an access to that fresh water. They can't use them anymore. So now we are moving away from just human impact on individual workers. Now we see impact on the local communities. A lot of processing also emits a lot of CO2 and similar emission. Factories are largely fueled by coal still. Many factories, and this is something that the report that you have mentioned, What Fuels Fashion, is talking about it. But even if they are not, there's a lot of energy that needs to go into this. After we have fabric, whatever that fabric is, it usually travels yet more. Sometimes it stays in the same factory, but it usually travels to another factory where it's going to be turned into a piece of garment, whatever that is. And sometimes garment can travel through few different factories to be completed, even if it's a simple garment, like, I don't know, let's say a dress, but it will be sewn in one garment, printed in another garment. Supply chain can be incredibly complex. So the dress might have to travel, and people who sew our clothes are also usually underpaid and overworked, working in highly unsafe environments. Again, those factories will probably use unrenewable resources for their energy, for their electricity, and we just have a lot of traveling. Finally, eventually, often after a few factories, those clothes will finally travel somewhere to storage. Depending on the business model, those storage units can be on another side of the world, like from Eastern Asia to Europe or to US. Ultra fast fashion has cut that. They're often not storing a lot, but that does not mean they have sorted that issue. They have not. But the clothes will continue to pollute that way. They have to travel often long distances. And then finally, we will buy those clothes. And then when we wear them, they continue to have impact on the environment. If it's polyester, every time we wear, and especially every time we wash those clothes, they will leak microplastics into our systems. And it is estimated that 1/3 of microplastics in our oceans and sea comes from fashion industry. The only industry that produces more microplastics is tire industry, the car tires. So that's not very glamorous from us. But then they will also continue, if they have some chemicals, they will also continue to leak chemicals. And then after a while, we will stop wearing those clothes and we'll try to get rid of them. Even if we try to donate them, statistically, chances are that they will eventually end up in the landfill, because our donation systems are just a part of this larger machine, and they cannot process the amount of clothes they are getting. They will end up in the landfills, either our own or, unfortunately, statistically, most likely in landfills of the global south countries, where they are just not enough infrastructures to deal with them. So they will end up either rotting in landfills, being burned, or washing on the beaches, ending up in deserts, etc. So they will continue to now even more visibly pollute our environment. I tried to be as short as I could.
No, but it's a very impressive, well, not in a good way, but impressive story, I think. And it's even better to see how actually many things are so interlinked. Because when you think about fashion, I mean, you wouldn't start thinking about fossil fuel production, for instance, but it's super relevant because, as you said, I don't know how many percent, but majority of the clothes are produced by using those fossil fuels to fuel, to transport, to process, to everything you need those fossil fuels. So it's super linked. And then it comes the class issue, which is deeply intertwined in this topic, because you're talking about how in countries where there is like less regulation in terms of water, in terms of production and etc., dyes or I don't know, whatever chemicals they use during the production can leak and pollute soil and water, and then it impacts local communities. But this does not happen in rich countries. This always happens in poorer countries where basically the rest of the world doesn't care about what happens to these communities, because who cares if they're just poor and they're producing these clothes that we wear for very cheap, so why would I care? And
Indeed,
this is like a bit of the problem. Everything is super interlinked, and I know it is very frustrating to always think about these things, but it is what it is. And I myself try as much as possible to check what this like clothes, like I don't know, t-shirt or trousers are made of. But then after all, as you said, and I genuinely try as much as possible to not to shop from these fast fashion brands. But then again, you see the price, and even if it's like 100% cotton, let's say, and I know for a fact that there were some reports that even that was a bit like, I don't know if the correct word is like greenwashing or something, but then if it says like 100% cotton, it actually was not in many cases.
Yeah. Now we have a bit stricter regulations, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then you check that and it's actually very cheap. And even if you think about the economy of scale, because the mass production might make it very cheap, it cannot be that cheap. And the human part, I think, is the very disturbing part here, because you see how people are underpaid. And with underpaid, we don't mean like a little bit up below the minimum wage. It's truly like pennies on dollars. And that makes it even more difficult to not to feel frustrated. So maybe before closing the negative part and going to what we can do part, we can also touch upon to this issue, because this is how your story also started. This is how you became an activist on this topic, by a human connection, by getting to know someone who actually was exploited by this industry. So we can mention a little bit on that, because you probably obviously know more on this. How exactly are people being exploited? You mentioned the health part, but also, which is very important, I'm not excluding it, because health will impact their forever life, and I'm pretty sure that they don't have the social security to cover these kind of damages after they stop working, if they can stop working. So we can discuss also how this industry exploits women and children, particularly, I believe, and how it benefits from it.
The fashion industry, pretty much the only humans who benefit from the fashion industry are those who own big companies. Pretty much everyone down the supply chain is exploited one way or another. Obviously, today there are million and million people who are making our clothes, from farmers who are raising the crops that we use to people who are sewing our clothes and everyone in between. Now, there are many ways the industry impacts people, and I would just like to mention that this is not only like Eastern Asia problem or whatever other countries we associate. Yes, Bangladesh and China and India are the biggest producers of textiles in the world, and this is where we see the biggest impact, obviously, just by the scale. But this is very much a problem anywhere we go. You mentioned Turkey, for example. This is a big producing country, but also within EU, Romania is a big producing country as well. And the same working conditions that we can discuss in countries like Bangladesh, we can easily discuss them in Romania or Bulgaria or countries of the Balkans, so just outside the EU. So it just speaks that that situation might be a bit different, but it's not necessarily the individual country issue. It is the systemic issue. It is a bigger global issue. Now, most people who work in the industry are people who are already in weaker power position or are marginalized already because the system traps them in poverty. So this is why most people who work in the industry are women, often young women. That does not mean we do not have men, especially when it comes to things like farming. We do have men as well, but already women in many places have less rights, are more dependent on power structures like men, so they're more likely to end up in this industry. They also have less power and support system often to help them get out of this system. There are no bigger or less bigger issues. Some of the biggest issues is certainly the low wages. And we are here talking about extreme low wages. We are here talking about poverty wages. Often countries or factories will brag that they are paying the national minimum wage, which is legally defined wage usually. It's not always the case, but often brands will pay the companies will pay the minimum wage. Unfortunately, in many, many countries, the gap between the minimum wage and so-called living wage, or in other words, how much you have to earn monthly to afford just the basic needs. We're not talking about luxuries, but just basic needs like food, accommodation, whatever that means, health insurance, transport costs if you have kids to be able to send them to school. So just the bare survival things, the gap between minimum and living wage can be very, very, very big. I'll just give you an example. In Croatia, that is considered like very, well off country compared to majority of the world. The gap is 26%. In Bulgaria and Romania, it's much more. In Bangladesh, for example, it has reduced in recent years because of all this pressure on the fashion industry, but the gap is still very, very big. So even when companies or factories claim that they are paying minimum wages, that doesn't mean those wages are ethical. They're still poverty wages. Now, when you earn so little, you often have to work overtime to be able just to make the ends meet, though that overtime is sometimes even not compensated. And when you are earning barely anything, you are in less of power to say no to such things. But people are often working like 12 to 14 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week, just to make the ends meet. Many of them are even paid by the piece they produce rather than hour, which is highly unethical practice, because if you don't meet certain quotas, you will not get enough money that day. So imagine what happens when you're overworked. You obviously are getting more tired, you're getting more prone to sicknesses, but nobody can afford a sick leave. So injuries are pretty common, and there's no health insurance that you can afford. Oftentimes, you're working also in factories that are not well equipped. You're working with machinery that is not very well kept because it's an extra cost for the factory. You're sometimes working with dangerous either machinery or chemicals, as we were mentioning when we were talking about dyes, without proper equipment. So getting sick from your own labor is a very common thing, but also even just living near the factory can make you sick, like the polluted river or polluted soil or polluted air that comes due to the factory can impact you and, for example, your children. So the health cost is very, very high, but also the factories are often very hard places to work and very dangerous places to work. Physical, verbal abuses are not uncommon, and sexual abuse or assault is also not uncommon. We have, unfortunately, often reports about women being abused at their work because oftentimes they are working super underpaid jobs and their managers are men who have power over them. But even if it doesn't come to that extreme cases, verbal abuses are normal, threats are normal. People are often asking, sometimes consumers in the West are asking, okay, well, if the jobs are so bad, why don't they do something about it? Well, we often have cases where people who tried to unionize or try to negotiate somehow better salary, they were blackmailed, they were beaten up, they were assaulted in different ways, they were threatened in different ways. So just doing something about it is not as easy as we can think, and there are no laws to protect you. You're also depending on contracts that are not very transparent, contracts that are finding the loops. If you even have a contract, they're finding the loops in the laws. So you really have no protection as maybe we would, and rightfully so, expect. What else?
I think migrants are also quite used in this sector, especially
Yes,
undocumented migrants.
absolutely. It's the same reason why generally most garment workers are women. Anyone coming from a marginalized background or anyone coming from a perspective where they do not hold power, and undocumented migrants are probably in the least powerful group. They are more likely to end up in this industry and end up being exploited because they do not have a support system to help them advocate for better or to search for better. They're often looking for any survival methods, and industry knows that, and industry will exploit that.
I find it very interesting when people can have the audacity to say, okay, if it's not good, why don't they do something? Well, I mean, don't we live in the same world? Can we do something? I mean, I'm not able to do many things, even though I see many injustices. So it's a very ignorant thing to say, actually.
I agree. I agree. And we have very well documented attempts to do something and documented conflicts around it. Conflicts where even, national army or guard would be sent to garment workers. There were many cases like this in Bangladesh. So, yes, it is not as obvious, and it is not that those people don't see what the impact of the industry is on them. They're much more aware than any of us could be, but there isn't often a choice.
Yeah, I can totally see like the National Guard to be sent this kind of things, because I think it becomes at a point where everywhere, in almost every country, there is a certain level of corruption. If an industry truly depends on those workers, they will do everything in their power to make sure that the country that they're the labor they're exploiting will support it in some way, because it's an income for them. And I can totally see the corruption that is going around, because that not only happens in fashion industry, but in many industry where workers demand something more, there's always the politics aspect involved. And well, it is so corruption that people are working in these conditions, obviously, like it is overlooked. But yeah, that's why people cannot search for their right. But
Indeed.
then, yeah, sorry.
Just indeed, this is why we can't expect garment workers, to solve this issue when many of them are trapped in poverty cycles, when many of them are threatened with their lives or their livelihoods. We cannot expect, they should fight for their own well-being. And they
Yeah.
are, don't get me wrong, they are.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we understand that many of them are not just passive workers as we like to imagine them sometimes. No, they are resisting daily.
No, of course. I mean, we are not putting it in a way that they need saving, kind of a thing. No one needs our saving. It's just we are part of this system that is benefiting from people or exploiting people. And that is the part that actually I, in many cases, or throughout this episode, or you probably are also talking. We are not asking anyone to take a flight. Well, take a flight, that's already problematic, but to go save workers like a hero. No. We are just saying that this system is not working and then it needs to change.
That is correct. But what we are asking is that we recognize that we are a part of this system.
Of course.
And sure, it's not your fault, it's not my fault individually that the system that pollutes local ecosystems and is directly responsible for deaths of thousands and thousands of people. No, we are not responsible for that. But just by the very fact that we wear clothes and we buy clothes, that means we are a part of it. And there are different things we can do, and some of them are more obvious, some of them are less obvious, and there is no better or worse. There are many different things that we can do.
Yeah. Indeed. I personally believe that most of us, all of us maybe, are responsible in one way or another. Obviously, I'm not equally responsible as this big company, like, I don't know, whatever group, because they are not even just brands, they also have this like umbrella company. I'm obviously not as responsible as them, but I of course believe in the power of this individual act, which is, I believe it's increasing, or maybe it's my algorithm that I mostly see those kind of things. But I think people like genuinely trying to change or influence things. This is what you're also doing. But I want to also discuss, okay, we talked about all the gloomy and upsetting things, but and then it might look like fashion is actually something bad, but no, fashion is not something bad. And I want to discuss a little bit about that as well, to give also a little bit more positive perspective. Fashion is not bad because it has always been there. It has always been part of the culture. Everyone can just go back and look at their ancestors or in their region what people were wearing. And yeah, you're from the Balkans, and I'm also from the Balkans, Eastern European countries. They have always in their codes like some sort of embodiment or like things, symbols that was showing, that was telling a story, that was a decoration, something pretty, something beautiful. So maybe you're more invested in this topic. So maybe you can a bit explain us how actually fashion is also beautiful and it's part of the culture?
I love fashion. I just really don't like the dominant industry. But it's the reason why I love organizing events, and it is often to celebrate the beautiful parts of fashion. Now, as you mentioned, we humans have always been fashionable, and it's not just the elites whose clothes we have usually preserved in museums. A lot of people throughout the history have cared about their looks and do care today. Even when they say that they don't care about fashion, they still care about their looks. Things like grooming, styling have always been a part of what we as humans do. And I think that fashion is one of those things that make us human, because clothes are beyond just a practical thing. They are, a lot of us don't wear a lot of things that we wear just because we need to cover our bodies. We also wear them because we think it looks cool or it says about something about us. So this is something that is very, very human. Throughout history, throughout countries, we have found things like jewelry and accessories and different stitching methods and different symbols that we have used. We can talk about it in lengths. A lot of time people think that when we advocate for the end of fast fashion, we advocate for the end of fashion, we advocate for stopping of clothing production. No, not at all. I think that we will always have a need to produce new clothes. I don't think producing new clothes is inherently a bad thing. We always been doing that. It's just the way we are doing it right now. We can't keep that. And this is what we want to stop. There are many beautiful things even today. There's no perfect brand. Don't get me wrong. There's no perfect brand, but many smaller and independent businesses are showing that it is completely possible to be more sustainable and more ethical, even in the current system, and still be profitable. And I think that many of them are blueprints for how the industry could look like. And the secret is usually they produce way less. And it might sound simple, but it's really in the core of a lot of our problems in fashion industry. There are also many incredibly talented people making clothes today. Fashion industry often can be kind of boring, honestly. When you exit fast fashion and when you stop shopping trends, you realize how mainstream fashion can be boring and repetitive. But then if you embrace slow fashion, it can be so much fun and so much cool. And I honestly think that I have properly developed my own personal style when I embraced slow fashion, because slow fashion will make you start thinking about every piece of clothing you own, and you will start treating your own wardrobe as this premium space where not everything can just enter. It has to have a reason to enter, and you will start thinking way more about it, and you will start also having fun with it. And once you stop also caring about the whatever's trendy or whatever's cool, you will also give yourself freedom to enjoy clothes more. It can be incredibly liberating for some. It can be incredibly creative for some, but it also doesn't have to. You can also choose to not think much about it, and that's also okay. That's also your choice. Slow fashion offers all of that. I personally like to focus on experimentation and creativity, but that's my choice. And yeah, I would just like to say that even in the city that we are both based in, there are so many cool small artists and artisans that I can promise you it will always be worth buying something from them rather than from a big chain.
I think it's super important. I mean, everything we just like we said during this whole hour was really, really important. But I think it's also very important to say ending fast fashion is not ending fashion. This is a very, very important message, I believe, because as you just said, I mean, I get so bored when I see those big brands and what they produce. It's just same.
Seriously.
Everything is same, and I don't even know what I want or what I want to wear anymore. Same goes for me about accessories because, and if you know me, like people who know me know that I love accessories. And when I see accessories that are produced again in the same logic, like in the fast fashion logic, they're just, I don't want them. They have no identity. They have
Exact.
they have no soul. But then when I look at, because I, especially on jewelry, because I don't know much on the fashions, on the clothing side, but on the fashions, on the jewelry side, I can completely see how it is much more different when you go search for something that was made, let's say, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, or something, or that was made through some more in an artisanal way, because then you can see that people put their soul in it. It represents something. It has an identity. People who wear it, because it's also a very geographical thing that
Yes,
communities, it's an identity for many communities. And in these days, many communities are struggling to exist anymore. And then fashion or jewelries or etc. become like a very vital objects. And fast fashion is
indeed.
deleting that actually.
Indeed, indeed. And I do sometimes wonder if clothes or accessories are the closest things to our bodies, something that has for generation helped shape and express human identities. What is happening to our own identities where those objects are produced anonymously, when we don't know where they come from, where we don't know what they contain, when they are just, where their object of existing is profit rather than expression. Just on a philosophical level, what happens to imagination, to creativity, but also to our own identities?
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I really don't think, just on a philosophical level, it doesn't make much sense. And then also we add to it all the environmental and human impact of it. And you really ask, what's the point? Really, what's the that kind of clothes serve no purpose in humanity. I mean, their purpose is to make money for those few rich ones. I think we also forget how fashion is profitable, truly profitable for some people. Some of the CEOs of some of the biggest brands are literally billionaires. So yes, their purpose is to make profit for already super rich people. And I like to ask people, is it really worth your money to buy a bunch of stuff and invest in a profit of already rich guy rather than save up money and support somebody who is living off this and who is making something more meaningful? I don't know. It's not if we can make a choice, I think we should ask ourselves sometimes those kinds of questions.
Yeah. And I think, I don't want to say majority of us, but a, a good proportion of us can make the choice. That's the important thing, because I mean, yeah, obviously we are not asking people who barely see the end of the month to
No, of course.
suddenly shop from like these small businesses. It's not the kind of transformation that we are talking about. But
No.
then, what kind of a transformation we are talking about?
No, indeed, you're right, and this is something you mentioned earlier. Like, what is actually our power? Here's the thing: we often say that we need fast fashion, otherwise, what would quote unquote poor people wear? Well, fast fashion usually profits from middle to upper income people, those who can afford to overconsume. Because even though individual items are cheap annually, a lot of consumers, especially in the West, are spending a lot of money on fashion. A lot. It's just that they are choosing to buy 50, 60 items or plus items a year rather than 5 to 6. And there's no denial that there are still many people, absolutely in the West as well, who struggle to make the ends meet, but they're not the ones who are going to go every other weekend and buy a full bag of clothes. They'll buy what they need. And if the industry really only depended on such people, the industry wouldn't exist and it wouldn't be so profitable and it wouldn't be so big. So I think that yes, there are people who cannot make that choice. That's right, they're not, their consumption is not an issue here. There are still things that they can do. They can support slow fashion in different ways. For example, they can help advocate for better fashion. They can help organize a community change. There are many things we can do that don't cost us money. Slow fashion is not only about where we buy, but how we buy. There are many things. I would say that slow fashion actually is fairly cheap thing. It is about wearing your clothes that you own, wearing them for longer, learning how to take care of them, learning how to extend their life cycle. It is about swapping clothes. It is about buying secondhand. It is about just buying less, but buying the best your money can afford at that moment. Even if you buy at H&M or Primark, whatever, but buying the best you can at that moment. So slow fashion is not necessarily costing more. But let's be real. Many people who are probably going to listen to this podcast, they do have a choice. Many of us are fortunate to be in a better economical position beyond bare minimum. Again, this is where you can choose to rather support a small business or rather go and retailer your clothes that you don't want to wear anymore, or just buy better quality, something that is a bit more expensive, but in long run it's going to last you longer. So yes, many of us do have a choice without realizing, and I think we do hold responsibility to some extent to do something. But let's also be real that if one person stops shopping at Sheins and Zara's and H&M's of this world, if they stop shopping, suddenly those businesses are not going to go out of business. Like one person is not going to have such a big impact. And this is why we also have to realize that part of slow fashion also means getting together and doing some collective action. That can maybe be advocating for better legislation, putting public pressure on brands, or just demanding greater transparency from brands. Can also mean um, it can also mean attending events that promote slow fashion. It can also mean supporting small businesses in a way of helping them promote, helping spread the word around them. It doesn't have to be only individual action. As individuals, yes, we do have things we can do, but it's not nearly as powerful when we do it collectively.
Yeah, indeed. And I always ask about like a call for action, and I think you did it very well in that sense. Yeah, because I don't know, I feel a bit frustrated when I talk to people and then they say, "Oh, it's okay. I will stop using plastic straws and then I will save the like I'm not going to save the world." Of course not. That is not what we are talking about. There are individual choices that we can make, but then there are also these communities that you mentioned that we can join,
Exactly.
we can take action together. And I
No,
think
exactly.
yeah,
I completely understand your frustration, and that plastic straw is one of them. Like, sure, my like lack of plastics, whatever, us not using plastic straws is not going to change the world, but does that mean we should just continue using plastic straws if we know they are better for the environment and better for us? Like, I always fail to see the logic beyond that. So if my action is not going to directly change the entire system, I should just continue doing bad things. I never, I could never understand that logic.
it's more like not my problem, I don't care. It's just
Yeah,
like, yeah, not my garden kind of
yeah,
an understanding, which we keep seeing more and more than it is our garden. It becomes our garden. Things don't stay isolated in particular places or within particular communities. It's increasing right now, and that's why I think it's important to mention the interdependence between the topics. So this is not fashion is not interdependent from social justice, from fossil fuels, from environmental damage, from everything. And then it start to makes more sense that it's actually our garden, like it's my backyard.
100%. I think in the last, especially last few years, we have seen climate change, impacts of climate change, even in Europe, that has been for a very long time, quote unquote, spared from it. We have seen things that many communities around the world have been experiencing for many years or even decades, like water scarcity, extreme droughts, extreme weather, floods, fires. We are seeing that now more and more frequent in Europe as well. We literally cannot ignore it. It's gonna come. Even fashion, textile waste, it's gonna come to us. It's going to bite us. And that doesn't mean that we have to wait until we literally see it to care. That's not very, very nice, honestly. But it's going to come to us as well. It's not isolated. Pollution, climate change, it's similar. Those things do not know borders, they travel.
Yeah, exactly. I think this was a very interesting discussion to talk about fashion, injustices in fashion, environmental damage, but also overall social justice. So before we close this episode, is there anything that you want to share? Is there anything that you feel like you haven't mentioned, or a message that you want to pass through? The floor is yours.
There's a reason why I call myself a fashion activist, and I think that all of us can be fashion activists, and it doesn't always mean going out and protest or doing direct political action, although don't get me wrong, that is very needed. Fashion for me is a lens through which I can analyze and think about different systems of this world, different things that are happening in this world. And it honestly helps me deal with a lot of big issues like war or injustice or climate change. And to me, it really helps. And to me, it's also a way I can figure out what I want to do about it. So I really would suggest that if you feel sometimes lost or overwhelmed in this world, which, let's be honest, it is a very common feeling for many of us, maybe try with a very simple thing and try to think about what is literally the closest to you, and that might be your clothes. And it might give you some hints about things that you can do about it.
I love it. I love this.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I will reflect myself as well on this. And yeah, I always like to end the episode just after that last reflection. We always do this during the evenings, and I appreciate it a lot that you spare some of your time, some of your personal time to join and to discuss with me. Thank you so much again, and thank you to the listeners as well.